still alive. They hit him with 5 shots and he's still alive.
Well, that's bad luck for me, and bad luck for you if you don't make that deal.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Stuff We've Seen. This is Jim, and now with me is the pickleball partner of William Barr, Teal.
Pickleball?
You don't know what pickleball? Well, of course you know what it is because you're his partner.
Yes, I love pickleball.
Pickleball, it's a little for the older folks, but it's you do it on the tennis court. It's a little smaller, and William Barr needs to slim down a tad.
He does. He could use a little more time on the court.
Yeah, he's filled with hot air.
It's inflated him. He's like a Mylar balloon.
Well, lying will do that to you.
It does. Yeah.
It takes a toll on the gut. Anyways, hello everybody, and it's been a little bit.
It's been a little while. We're back, ready to talk about movies.
We are, and we're going to pick up from where we last left off. It was sort of a cliffhanger.
It was a cliffhanger.
We had a film that we were just dying to tell you about, and then, of course, it was so important to us that we ran out of time, and we didn't talk about it. We ended up talking about lesser things.
Yeah, and so this time we're going to get into that sooner, I think.
We're going to do it right now. And it's funny because I think in the context of this particular show, it probably would have worked better in the second half. But then I feel like we could not get to it again. And then people will be like, what the hell are they doing? So we're going to talk about it. Now, Criterion channel, it's back. We've been watching movies on it. And one of the films that I watched was something that I had always wanted to see. I heard it was great, but for one reason or another, I didn't see it. And I watched it, and I thought it was amazing. And then I told you, Teal, to see it.
Yes.
And then you watched it.
And you didn't tell me much, just watch it.
Yeah, I don't like to really get into too much. And honestly, we probably won't delve in to too many spoilers or anything about this film.
Well, I think we can give away the end.
Well, yes. Okay. It's based on a true story. So anyways, the film is director Steve McQueen, not the famous actor who's been long gone, but the director of 12 Years a Slave. His first feature film was a movie called Hunger.
Yes.
It stars Michael Fassbender in it, and he was lauded for his performance as a real-life prisoner in Ireland. What was it, Ireland actually, or England?
It's in England, yeah.
Yeah, he was in an English prison in the early 80s. Bobby Sands.
Yes, an IRA
former
guy.
IRA, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is, so that's really it's kind of depressing subject matter right there.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think maybe that's Steve McQueen's kind of thing.
Yeah, he does definitely. Well, I think he tries to take a look at stories that have a lot of human injustice.
Yes.
And, the whole IRA thing in Ireland.
Yeah, the whole IRA thing. Let's just call it a thing.
It's a very complex
Well,
issue.
I guess actually what they call it is the Troubles.
The Troubles.
Yeah.
Actually, don't they even mention that at the beginning?
Yes.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of complexities in understanding that the IRA members who were arrested, they wanted to be seen as political prisoners.
Yes.
And that comes with a certain, set of kind of rules and requirements. And Margaret Thatcher and the British government basically abolished that condition
Yeah.
and said they could not be political prisoners. So the early 80s was a time of revolt in the prisons.
Yes, protest.
And various protests. One was kind of a very disgusting
Mm-hmm.
protest where they refused to bathe or flush the toilets, and they would smear their feces all over their
prison cell. Yeah.
and they would pee outside the cracks of their.
Yes, out into the hallway under the door, and they refused to wear clothes too, prison clothes.
Because they wanted to be treated as political prisoners and be able to wear their own clothes.
Yes.
So I mean that's a very, very short version.
Yeah,
of the
but
story.
it's a story about people that are essentially powerless, trying to find some power in this system that sort of it has taken so much away from them, but they still have their bodies in a way.
Basically, this movie, which is a very, very economical hour and a half.
Yes.
And it's kind of broken out into 3 parts, I would say.
Yes.
Almost equal parts.
Mm-hmm.
And what Steve McQueen as a director is very interested in is not really getting into the politics that have brought us to the moment of the story.
Yes.
He's interested in the humanity of the way these prisoners are treated within the prison system.
Exactly.
It's also what is the mental toll this process takes on the people who are, I guess, the jailers, right?
Yeah.
The people who are working within the prison, keeping these prisoners locked up. And there's a fair amount of physical and mental torture and abuse of these prisoners at the hands of these officers, I guess, who are being instructed to do this.
Yes.
And you, in a very quiet, non-judgmental way, I think this is what's really great. And I think we're going to be talking about this throughout this episode.
Yeah.
There's this idea of subjectivity versus objectivity.
Yes.
In films.
Yes. Yes.
And sometimes one could argue is that every film, and especially in the hands of a director, is subjective. So the point
Right.
of view that you're watching, who are we seeing the film through, the eyes through? And also, can we trust what we're seeing?
Can we trust what we're seeing through that narrator, that point of view character in a way?
So what Steve McQueen, as a director in this film, is trying to do is he is trying to, I think, take an objective view.
Yeah, as much as possible, just to sort of stand back and say, this is what's happening.
Yeah, now he's being subjective in what he chooses to show us.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we can go back and forth on what's subjective and what's objective, but he's trying to just sort of lay it there in front of you. Although there are ways in which he comments on it.
Yes.
And one way he does that, particularly in the early part of Hunger, is with these widescreen compositions where he basically cuts the screen in half. And so you'll have a person on one side, maybe a bar down the middle even, like a part of a wall or the window of a car or something. And so he'll have a person on one side and then, maybe nothing on the other side. And so he sort of splits the screen. It's not actual split screen, but he's sort of dividing it up into, I think, showing that there's these 2 different worlds going on.
Yeah, and there's and this is the first part is I feel very objective.
Yes.
He wants to show you something, but without much of dialogue. All the dialogue in the first half hour is very incidental.
Yes.
Meaning that if there's any words spoken, it might be just a background conversation that somebody has. It doesn't seem very scripted. So everything he wants you to figure out is through just watching these interactions.
Exactly.
Let you figure it out. You don't really know the story too much.
Yeah, like right at the beginning of the film, we start with a character and we see him having breakfast, and then he goes out to his car to go to work, and he checks under the car to see if there's any bombs. And none of this is done in dialogue. We're supposed to sort of figure that all out as it's happening.
Yeah, and what I liked about that, which already intrigued me, is we have no idea who this guy is.
Yeah.
We don't know how important he is. We don't know what he's doing even in the story. But when he checks under the car, because we know we're watching a story about the IRA,
Yeah.
we know that somehow he is not most likely an IRA member and that he is somewhat of...
He's a potential target because he's in a position of power, and yeah.
And we have no idea why, but then we will soon find out. And so I think he uses this particular character to tell a lot of information, not necessarily about this person's story.
Exactly. But he also uses this character to bring us from our world into this prison world. And this character goes between both worlds. So it starts in our world, our recognizable, I mean, it's the 1980s in England, but it's our recognizable world. And then it very quickly brings us into this prison world with the feces smeared on the walls and people being beaten and terrible hygiene and just this really kind of visceral experience of being in prison.
Yeah, and basically the violence stems from it's this idea that the government is going to try to break these prisoners' will
Yes.
and make them bend the knee to what they say they should behave. And that shows the defiance that these, well, there's women in the prison too, and
Yeah.
they didn't focus on that story, but it's these, it's the will that these men have to not be broken by the system. And the thing is that we know, if you know anything going in on the story, you know that it's about
Bobby Sands'
hunger strike.
Yes, and you know that he dies.
Well, and I don't feel like that's a spoiler, because
It's
if you're
not a
watching this
spoiler.
and don't know that he dies, well, you know, this is a true story. So he dies. But the first 25 minutes when it's setting all this up, we don't have Bobby Sands in the movie.
Yeah.
He's not there. Michael Fassbender, who plays Bobby Sands, he's not even a character yet.
No.
in the story.
And when he's introduced, it's not with a big introduction.
No, and you don't know how this is all going to play into anything.
Right.
You know, you don't really know that they're going to be planning a hunger strike. There's a lot of intricate moments shown on film of the various inmates passing notes, but
Yes.
you don't know what's said on the notes. You don't know anything that's happening. It's very intriguing, and you, as a film watcher, you definitely feel like you're in the hands of a director who clearly knows how to tell a story in a very interesting way.
Exactly. And in a way that's, I think we've mentioned this, but there's just minimal dialogue in this film. And one thing I like about that is, you know, when you hear the Bobby Sands story, and we've kind of laid it out here, the Bobby Sands story, I think, lends itself to melodrama. And it would be would be very easy to make sort of a movie of the week tearjerker out of this story.
Yeah, lots of quick cuts and moving camera and emotional music.
Yes, and yelling out political speeches and pounding on the doors and stuff, you know. And it would have focused more on the people who come to visit them in prison and the emotional toll of that. You know, and all of these things are in there, but it's done in such a way where it's not melodramatically or even dramatically. It's not using sort of classical drama structure to develop characters through conflict and dialogue and things like that. It's letting it happen in front of you. And yeah, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and you sort of suspect all of that and are aware of that, but it's not about the politics. It sort of puts the politics back and just focuses on the very immediate lives of these characters.
But now, and this is where, again, I feel like we were in the hands of a budding master.
Yes.
Filmmaker, is that the audience does need to get that information.
Yes.
And how Steve McQueen chooses that is in segment 2 of the film.
Yes.
Where Bobby Sands goes into a private, you know...
It's like a visiting room.
Yeah, visiting room with a priest. And it is told for the first 17 and a half minutes of this scene.
Yes.
In one take, one shot.
One shot with two characters, one character on each side, sitting across a table from each other.
And the camera never zooms in or zooms out, it's in
There's
one
no
very
camera
static.
movement and no editing.
So you have two actors, and they now have to act this scene with a lot of dialogue.
Yes.
And it starts out with small talk and interesting chit-chat for probably the good first 5 to 8 minutes.
It's 5 to 8 minutes. Yeah, it's a while of chit-chat.
And then we get into it and you learn. Now, here's what I think is amazing. When you have a scene like that, it takes a lot of concentration to focus as a watcher and listen and pay attention to what they're saying. But because this scene is so abruptly different than what we've been experiencing, we are now primed for something else.
Yes.
And we are intrigued and we are sucked in to this conversation with two characters that, quite honestly, you haven't really gotten a good look at Michael Fassbender yet. And in this scene, they're backlit, and you can't even really tell what the priest looks like or what Bobby Sands looks like.
Right, you can't.
You don't get to see his face, and the acting has to kind of work itself out in a much different way than you get in a movie.
Yes.
It's a fantastic. I mean, based on what I had just watched in the first 25 minutes, then this comes in and it really floored me. And then it prepared me for the final section of the film, which was literally Bobby Sands' hunger strike.
Yes.
And it's not focused on, like you just said, about it's not all the drama moments of prisoners rallying and then outside crowds. It's really just a very intimate,
it's basically
personal journey.
Right, with this guy basically lying in bed and wasting away. And I wanted to ask you about this. While he's in bed towards the end, there's a shot where the camera kind of hovers in closer to him and then moves back, and there's sort of these they almost look like flies, or they're not flies though. They're like a darkness coming in around him, and those shots I felt like were the most subjective in the film.
Well, because so now we've got a different narrative structure.
Yes,
you are seeing. Like, it's almost like we are now God, but we also are going into what is he experiencing.
Exactly.
So for the first and only time, we are taken into a particular character and are trying to experience what does that feel like. So he has switched narrative techniques several times in this movie.
Right.
But it all pays off. And I mean, again, when this movie ended, I really felt like I was taken on an amazing journey.
Yes.
And it drained me a bit. And I was I had nothing. I was sitting on the couch with my mouth dropped open.
Me too.
And I was like, I can't believe I just watched what I just watched.
Well, it's an experiential film. It's about the experience of watching it. You can't really tell somebody, like, you can't really tell the story and get the same effect, right? Because you end up with that Bobby Sands TV movie. But the experience of watching this is really engaging. I mean, I sat there just with my jaw up and going, wow, this guy is a visionary.
And it's just interesting that he's made 4 movies.
Yeah.
I have now seen 3, but this was his first, and I had to, I've gone backwards now to watch that.
Yeah.
And it's funny, the first 3 films he made all featured Michael Fassbender in various, importance of roles. But one was Shame, and then the follow-up was 12 Years a Slave, which is his most famous. I think it's probably his best film that I've seen. But Hunger, I mean, that's not taking anything away from that. It's just, if you have the Criterion channel now, you definitely want to check that out.
Well, yeah, but know what you're getting into. I mean, this is not an easy movie to watch.
Well, it's not a comedy, and I mean, this is like such a sobering drama. There's not a laugh in the movie. So, but I guess what I loved, and it's funny, is that on the last show, and this is why I thought we were trying to end it with Hunger,
right, is
we had these recommendations to watch these Craig Zoller movies, right?
Right.
And here, I took a lot of issue with his storytelling abilities and how he drags things out.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, we have this hour and a half film that gave me so much, tons of information in a brilliant filmmaking technique. And an hour and a half. I mean, I don't mind a longer movie. It's pretty amazing. It was perfect.
Yeah.
It's perfect timing.
So I watched McQueen's most recent movie, and we won't get into it too much now, but Widows, which came out in 2018.
Yeah, I'm going to point this out. Okay, so this is hilarious. Is that we knew we were going to talk about this today, right?
Yeah.
And then he has 2 other movies that I have seen, okay? But there is one I haven't, which is Widows. So which is the film that Teal goes and watches? He goes and watches Widows. And then he watches it and tells me about it just yesterday when I have no time to watch it. So, great way to plan the episode.
Well,
and now I did plan this. I actually rehearsed scolding you about Widows.
Yeah, okay. So I won't get too far into Widows.
Does it feel like already, like, could you see Steve McQueen trademarks in it?
Yes, and I think, this movie actually has pretty good reviews. I think it's got like an 85 on Metacritic or something.
Yeah, but it also has some real negative reviews.
It's got some really negative reviews, and I think it's a love it or hate it kind of thing.
And this is his first, like, kind of like, I would say, commercial action-y type movie, right?
It's kind of a genre film. I mean, he co-wrote the screenplay with Gillian Flynn from Gone Girl. She's
not a big Gillian Flynn.
Yeah, and I'll say this about the movie, that I think it is a misapplication of his style to this genre.
But that can be interesting, though.
Yeah.
So I'll have to. I'm going to see it.
Okay,
and then we can talk about it, and maybe you'll get to see the other 2 in between sandwiched
yes.
movies. There.
Yeah, I'll throw those.
12 Years a Slave.
Yeah, but getting back to Hunger, it's it just got me thinking about these movies that I think minimal dialogue is one thing. There's so little dialogue, and I was saying this. It's not dramatic dialogue. Even the scene with the priest. Well, I guess there's some drama in that because there's a conflict between the 2 of them about how to go about the hunger strike, or even whether to do the hunger strike.
But here's what I liked about it. It felt very well. I think what you're reaching for is that it's a scene that didn't feel very screenplay-ish. It felt more like a real conversation that 2 people might have.
Yes, that's exactly it. It doesn't feel screenplay-ish. It doesn't feel movie-ish, and it's not using melodrama and sentiment to sort of gin up an emotional reaction from the audience in sort of an easy way. There's buttons that are really easy to push in an audience, and this movie avoids those buttons and pushes other ones instead. And it's all the more powerful because of that. And I think this is something that's specific to what film can do, which is it can give you this really visceral experience. And I'm going to use that word a lot and keep coming back to it because it's
a visual medium, right?
It's visual medium, but people watch movies in a visceral way, right? Because we see something and it almost affects, like, okay, when you read something or you take something in through language, it's going in through your frontal lobe and you're processing words and language and thought. But when you see, like, somebody being beaten, it bypasses the language part of your brain and goes straight to sort of your primate brain, which is this fight or flight kind of response, right? And so you really get in there viscerally. You get attached to it. You feel it as opposed to thinking it. And this is something that I think Hunger does incredibly well. And it gives you that experience of having been through something.
What are some examples that you would present out there that people might want to take a look at?
Okay, well, I think I'm going to go back. I'm getting back to basics. I'm going to start with 2001, Space Odyssey.
I can't believe I didn't even put that on my list. How could I? That's so stupid of me because that's like the classic film where there's actually maybe only like in the whole movie, 40 minutes of scenes that even have dialogue in it?
Yeah, and a lot of that dialogue is incidental. But it also does these things similar to Hunger, right? There's that Haywood Floyd comes in to give the speech to all the people on the moon, and it's just like, here's a guy giving a speech for 8 minutes.
Well, yeah, you know what is funny is that, right, he picks and chooses his moments to give the audience the essential info they need.
Exactly. And
it's ironic is that, see, the beginning of the film, right, which is the Dawn of Man sequence, that is my favorite part of the entire movie. And it's also, like, even my littlest, when we watched it in 70 millimeter last year, and he was only 6 at the time, that was his favorite part.
Interesting.
I'll offer up two films that they do have dialogue. There's a story and there's conversation. However, there are large passages of these two films where it's just about action
and experience,
and just an emotion, and that's both The Road Warrior and Mad Max Fury Road.
Well, Fury Road was, yes, next on my list. It's interesting. I saw this film with a few people who hated it.
Great movies are often polarizing.
Yeah, are very polarizing. I had somebody say, "There's no story. They just drive somewhere and drive back."
There is actually a great story in there.
There is, but I think what you're getting at with this film is that so much of the story and the character development, character interaction, is done through movement and gesture and glance and just the looks on people's faces, the expression of the actors, how they physically interact with their environment, and yes, how they look at each other. And so much of what would normally be in dialogue in a movie is put into gesture and look. And it makes it for, again, a powerful kind of experience because you're not thinking about it as much as experiencing it in real time. And so, yeah, I think Fury Road is almost, I don't know, I could just wax on about this movie forever. But it's a really incredibly well-told or well-executed telling of character stories. But I think a lot of people, some of the people who didn't like the film, just didn't pick up on all of that. They want the dialogue handed to them.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we could do a whole episode that I'm not prepared for right now, but on, movies that dialogue is the thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, take any Tarantino movie.
Yeah, and that is a mixture of, there's a visual technique.
Oh, no, there absolutely is.
The dialogue's what gets the star of the show, right? He changed, at least for many years, he changed how people thought about dialogue.
Exactly, yeah. And it is, of course, he's got a visual sense, and there's visual storytelling going on and all of those things, but the dialogue is the star of the show, yeah. Whereas in something like Hunger or Fury Road, the dialogue is more incidental.
But see, this is where we get back to S. Craig Zahler or Zahler or Zahler.
Are we ever going to let this guy go?
Well, no.
Yeah.
But so here's the thing: is all he has going for him, and it's working for him so far. Is he's got these stories that have these moments of violence that we haven't quite seen on screen before.
Yeah.
So he's raised the bar of like how visual you can go with showing something that people just, it's maybe grossed out exploitative violence, but besides that, the filmmaking technique is non-existent. It's like he's got the camera on there and whatever maybe the cinematographer says put it there, but I don't think he's got a lot of thought.
Exactly, it's not
the impact that the way he's shooting it could make somebody feel in their brain.
Right, exactly. And
he's just making sure that you get to see the brains when they're splattering.
That said, the third act of Dragged Across Concrete, I think visually, I think it's choreographed quite well.
Well, he's a third act master.
He's a third act master. He's
got 3 movies where it's all the third acts. I know you still haven't seen the other two, right?
No, I haven't.
We're going to have to get back to them.
Yeah, we'll get back to them.
All right. Well, here I'm going to throw out.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to kind of pair these just before because we'll move on to our next topic soon.
Yeah.
But 2 other films. I guess it's another filmmaker that seems to thrive on the visual aspects of his films. Drive and Neon Demon.
I was going to bring up both of those films, and Drive. You may need to correct me if I have this wrong, but I think what I remember hearing is that he got the screenplay for Drive and went through and just crossed out dialogue.
And a lot of those visual directors will do that. They'll like say, you know what, we don't need all this, and that makes sense. I mean, of course, there are just some great dialogue moments because Albert Brooks puts in one of the scariest performances, and that he was robbed of not getting an Oscar nomination that year. It still bothers me because I loved his character in that film.
Me too.
But it is we're establishing a very cool look, that opening sequence where you get to see the driver in his craft.
Yes.
And I think that's an important thing. Whenever you have a movie about somebody and their profession plays into the plot, you like to see, like, well, how does that character do it? Like, what are they good? Like, so it's called Drive, and this guy's like the driver. Can he drive? I mean, it's like the movie Baby Driver, right? It works at the very beginning. You get to see how he is the master of driving.
Yes.
And you got to have these moments where you can see how they work. And since
in Ryan Gosling,
yeah, I'll think. Yeah, I'm gonna come back. So like Ryan Gosling's performance is, it's not dialogue free, but he's pretty silent performance. So it works really well at the beginning that you just see this cool customer performing something with like no dialogue.
Right. Yeah, and it has a very specific effect on the viewer. Another one I'm just going to throw out there is like the first 20 minutes of Blue Ruin. Yeah, hardly any dialogue. It establishes this character, his backstory, what his revenge trip is about. Everything is established almost without dialogue.
Another one that does the same thing. It tells you the whole history and understanding of this man. Is There Will Be Blood, the opening 20 minutes.
I didn't have that on my list.
Yeah, there's no dialogue. And I remember I saw it opening weekend, and it was a packed house, and there was this older gentleman behind me. And we're watching this awesome, masterful set of images where there's no dialogue.
Yeah.
And this guy is like narrating, mansplaining what's happening to his wife.
Oh, no.
And I finally turned around and I said, do you think if the director felt we couldn't understand what was going on, he would have put dialogue in it? Or do you think maybe it's quiet for a reason? And it shut him up for the whole movie because I was like, there's a reason why we're not hearing any dialogue. We're watching the images. Figure it out. You don't need to. I'm sure your wife understands. She doesn't need you telling her what's happening, Mr. Narrator.
Oh, man. Yeah, there's a reason why Blade Runner no longer has a narrator. So a couple other sort of points I want to make about this is there was a movement, and this still sort of exists. It's still something people talk about, cinema pure or pure cinema. And it was a avant-garde filmmaking movement in the 20s and 30s. And the idea was that film is really just about moving image, sound, the rhythm of editing, but it's largely just about movement. And if you strip everything else out, you strip out the dialogue, you strip out story and narrative, and you even strip people out of it, and you're just left with sort of just images, moving images. Just reduce the medium to its bare minimum. If you want to see one of these, one on YouTube called Ballet Mécanique.
Yeah, which you forced me to watch.
Which I forced you to watch.
I had seen it like way many years ago.
Yeah.
It's torturous.
It's absolutely torturous. It is just unbearable. It's like 16 minutes long, and it's a Dadaist, post-Cubist, just movement, it's not even images because they're not really of anything.
Un Chien Andalou is much more interesting.
Un Chien Andalou is much more interesting, yeah.
So is some of the work of Maya Deren, which is also this weird, like, there's not really a story going on, just images.
Exactly, and I think, a movie like Hunger or Drive or any of these ones we're talking about, it's not pushing all the way into that, which is just that pure cinema reduced to its most basic elements. But at the same time, this is something Kubrick was really interested in, was sort of the visual, the rhythm, the movement, how you go from one shot to the next and how that movement works. And I think with these other movies, we're talking about sort of the same thing, where it focuses on that a little bit more than the dialogue or the drama. It's
what the last movie I don't know if you ever saw this, but the last film I saw that even like was full length, that even came close to what you're describing, is David Lynch's Inland Empire.
Absolutely. I was going to basically say David Lynch kind of needs to be, in general, part of this conversation.
Because that movie, more than anything I've ever seen in my entire life, I mean, it's if there's a story there, I'm not quite sure what it is,
Right.
but it's like a whole big bag of like weird experimental ideas.
Yes.
And it's sure, but yet, and there's some moments in there that is sprinkled in that are so pure cinema
Yes.
that it sucks you in. There's like two little musical sequences that when they appear, for some strange reason, I get chills because they're just, I don't know, he has a way of doing things that other directors just can't do. And, so it's a weird experiment.
Yeah, and I would definitely put Eraserhead in this category.
Well, so I remember after I saw Inland Empire, I said to myself, okay, that could be the weirdest movie I've ever seen, and it definitely supplants the former champion, which was Eraserhead.
Yes,
which has more of a story, if you can believe it, compared to that. But that is also just taking the pure elements of film, and breaking every rule about storytelling.
Exactly, and there's something really refreshing about this, and it engages in a different way. Engages a different part of the brain. Another movie on my list here is Days of Heaven.
Oh well, that's again So we'll probably if we do this show long enough, we will have many instances where we bring up this movie, and I think that's what kind of we wanted to do. Was not to just have a show dedicated to Days of Heaven, but it's the fact that we could bring up that movie a lot. And of course, Terrence Malick, who's maybe mastered, perfected, and then abused the privilege of visual filmmaking.
Yes, exactly. That is so well put. Mastered, perfected, and then abused. And we're still in the abuse phase.
Yeah, we don't know. He's got the new film that's going to be at Cannes, Ragnon, and that might be a departure. We don't know yet, but his last few films, and sometimes a director like him, he has to experiment for several films to then maybe get out of that, but then use what worked into another movie, and maybe this film that's coming out, which is a German language film,
right?
Will be it.
I'm hopeful.
Days of Heaven is just, that movie. It is all about the visuals. Except that it has amazing narration in it.
Oh yes, it's got, and there is dialogue, but it's really a film that's based in the visuals.
Well, it's a mesh, right, of these amazing visuals, and then haunting music, which is a cheat. Everyone thinks it's all Ennio Morricone, but the theme that's used at the beginning and the end is actually a famous piece. But it's haunting, and I always, out of all the images, the thing that stays with me the most, there's an image towards the end of the film that Linda Manns, who plays this younger sister of Richard Gere's character, she is escaping out the window of an all-girls home, and she meets up with a friend that she had, kind of encounter on the road, and they escape together and run through the town, and you're seeing just like a blue color, and it's dawn, and the music kind of creeps out. It's just, there's this magic that he creates with the way the camera moves and the lighting, and I don't know, it always haunts me. I think of these little moments that the movie steals of human behavior or nature.
Well, definitely of nature. That's sort of a Malick thing, is to sort of insert nature into just about everything.
Well, it's the idea that it's sort of like the humans. It reminds us that nature is here and we are part of nature.
Exactly.
And that I think that happens with the Thin Red Line, right? Is that all this war is happening and this blood and death and destruction, and then you just see that when that all clears away and we've killed ourselves, nature is still there and it's all going around while this is happening, and there's beauty in it that a few of the characters are discovering, amongst all this just awful hell.
Yeah, is there a long cut of that movie?
Well, no, and I don't think we're ever going to get that. Well, I say that, but yet there's a long cut of The Tree of Life that's kicking around, which I think you can get on Criterion Blu-ray. And I haven't pulled the trigger on that, but I would hope that maybe it will come on the Criterion channel, and I'll get to see the full longer version.
And there was a long cut of New World also. I
haven't seen that either. Yeah. I will confess, because I've seen the full versions of some of his other experimental films, like Song to Song and Night of Cups, and I don't know. I'm a little scared.
I could not. I just couldn't do Song to Song. I think I gave it 30 minutes.
They're not good.
Yeah. But yeah, he's somebody definitely who is in that wheelhouse of trying to do sort of visual or sensory filmmaking. One film, I mentioned this to you, it's really hard to track down, called Leviathan from 2012. It's a documentary.
Yeah, because I was getting confused because there's an the late '80s crappy horror movie called Leviathan.
Yes,
and then there's like a foreign film.
There's a Russian film, I think, called Leviathan. So this is hard to track down. It was on Netflix for a while, but so if you're looking for it, it's from 2012. What they're doing is something they call sensory ethnography. So they're trying to put you into another culture, another world, in a documentary style, but the documentary is entirely image, sound, and it's sensory. It's supposed to appeal to your senses, not your thoughts. So this movie is on a fishing boat sort of in the North Atlantic. And they basically put cameras all over this boat and on the fishermen. And the opening shot of this film is, I think, about 17 minutes long. Really the only film I've seen that does this. I don't know if these filmmakers have made other stuff in their sensory ethnography genre. Well, they've eventually
right. You may be a completionist with one movie.
Exactly. Yeah, you may be able to complete this genre with one movie. Okay, so check out Leviathan if you get a chance, and just a few. I'm just going to throw out some titles. We don't have to get into them.
Of course you are.
Yeah, Gravity.
Oh yes. Okay.
Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah, okay. I'm not a big fan of that movie.
Neither am I, but I think it's doing something along these lines. All Is Lost.
Yeah, an excellent example.
Yeah, Robert Redford.
Robert Redford on the boat.
Yeah, with no dialogue. Fascinating.
I'll say this. Wait, now we have to. One thing I'll say on this is that there's like pretty much no dialogue in that movie, except for him maybe like uttering a few words. And I love that because a film like that's not supposed to, like, I would think that a person who's on a boat and he's dealing with a crisis isn't going to be talking to the camera or a screen or saying anything.
Right.
And yet the whole movie, you don't really notice he's not talking. It's a really great example of, you're watching it, you're riveted, and you don't mind that no one's really talking in the movie.
Exactly. And so I think getting back to what you were saying about the subjectivity versus the objectivity, something like Leviathan, super subjective. It's putting us in a character's point of view. And so I think, I don't know how to make this segue.
I don't know what you're talking about. A segue. I'm going to help you out, okay?
Help me out.
We should segue into another segment, and maybe you'll want to ask me if I've seen anything or caught up on some movies or whatever.
Well, yeah, because
okay,
so last time on our last episode, I watched a movie that I found on Criterion called Detour, and you had only watched the first half of it. Not only that, you had watched right up until the moment when the film changes into something really incredible. I think that this is the reason the film transcends is...
Yeah. So the thing is, the movie is only, an hour and 7 minutes?
Yeah.
So, unlike most films that, really haven't, the second act is really just kicking in at an hour and 7 minutes, this movie will be over. And I literally was exactly at one half done with the film.
Yeah.
And that means I'd only watched, basically like 34 minutes.
Yeah.
And it is so funny that we talked about that. And I was so intrigued by what you were saying about this one, because I was like, well, I kind of get where this is going, but how does this get any better? Right. So I later on that day, I was doing some stuff in my room, and I was like folding some clothes. I put it back on. And you are so right. Within minutes, this movie turns on a dime.
Yes.
And something happens right away. And I was so excited about this film that I was telling people the story, trying to get them so excited that this hitchhiker, right, that he picks up, which again, it seems so strange that he would be picking up any hitchhiker,
right,
is played by this actress, a B-movie actress named Anne Savage. And she gets in, and she immediately is not a nice person.
No, right off the bat, she is just a snake.
her delivery is tough and weird. And so she goes to sleep. And then we get back to the narration that the poor sap is kind of giving us throughout this film. But then suddenly, and this was just so amazing, suddenly her eyes open and she sits up, which is strange. And she looks at him and she goes, "What did you do with the body?" and I literally
snarls at him,
and I sat up on the couch. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. My brain is racing just like his. Like, what is she talking about? And pretty quickly you realize from what she's saying, because she seems to know the guy who was the owner of the car, that earlier on, when the guy who owned the car was still alive, before he mysteriously fell asleep and then fell out of the car and hit his head on a rock and died, he had talked about these big scratches that he got on his hand.
Yeah, from
that a female hitchhiker had given him.
Yes.
And what you discover is that this is the hitchhiker, and that she had somehow, hitched her way ahead of them.
Right.
And now he picks her up, and she basically is like, decides as an opportunist that she is going to blackmail this guy.
Yes.
And that she isn't done with him. And it's the weirdest blackmail you've ever experienced, where they decide, like, he says, "I'm going to get rid of the car when I get to L.A." And she's like, "What? What are you, an idiot?" And she's like, in Arizona, they give out free perfume in prisons to murderers. She comes up with all this great pulpy dialogue, and she's basically emasculating him, and she's like one of the toughest, meanest, female characters that I've ever seen. And it's like her delivery choices.
Yes.
It's almost so bizarre. Like, these movies, they only shot maybe one or two takes. So this is what she decided to do for a performance.
Yes. And she commits to it.
It becomes like her eyes, her profile, her voice, everything she does in this entire movie, it riveted me so much that when this was all over, I literally just have decided that this is one of my top 10 female supporting performances of all time.
Yeah, you had said, I think, earlier that it's up there with The Wicked Witch.
It is, and not that she's evil like the Wicked Witch.
No, but in terms of the
that's
performance,
how great it is.
Yeah,
I am never going to forget this character. I just won't.
Yeah, and it really, it makes the movie transcend. Like, up until then,
it's an ordinary low budget pulpy noir.
Exactly. But when
it's kind of fun.
But when she comes in, it makes this movie into something else.
She goes, "What are you, chicken?"
You're making.
But the way she says this.
What's the matter with you? You're making sounds like a husband.
That was the best. "You're making sounds like a husband." She makes him rent an apartment with her so that they can pretend to be husband and wife, so that when they go to the dealers of used cars dealers to sell the car, it'll look more legitimate. Like, this doesn't even make any sense, but it's so great.
Oh, no. Yeah, it doesn't. You're right. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
It just, it doesn't, and it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's just so great. And basically, you feel pretty quickly that it's going to get heated to the point where he can't take it anymore, and you think he's going to kill her, right? But then you remember at the beginning, he's this innocent victim. And then the weirdest thing, and I think this is what you were talking about, and I don't care. This movie is so, it doesn't matter if you know what's going to happen because it's so entertaining.
Yeah, we're giving it away.
They get in this fight, and she runs into this bedroom. There's a whole thing where she's going to blackmail him into pretending to be this guy further along, because she discovers that
there's some money.
The guy who owned the car was had an estranged dad, and the guy had told a story.
Yes, he had talked about how he was going to see his estranged dad, and then
and so she decides that they could, since they hadn't seen him in years, that he looked enough like him that they could blackmail this guy for his money, getting good, and then the guy's almost on his deathbed anyway. He decides he's not going to do it. He's too good of a guy. Right. So anyways, she grabs this phone, right? In the old days, there's phones with a long cord. She runs into the other room with the phone, and she's going to talk to the police. But then when she's in the bedroom, she kind of decides, she takes the cord and kind of wraps it around her
it happens
neck.
even before. As she's walking through the door into the other room, she starts wrapping it around her neck.
Yeah, so it's like, is she going to pull the old Glenn Close original Fatal Attraction ending where she's going to kill herself so that he can be blamed? But he starts tugging on the cord from the other room.
Trying to get the phone back from her.
Yeah, and in essence, he strangles her. And it's just so awkward. Like, it's so weird.
Well, see, it's the same thing as when the guy falls out of the car and hits his head on a rock. I think that the main character, the narrator, kills both of them. And that what we see is his version of events where he's kind of innocent, or it was an accident, right? The guy fell out of the car. No, he picked up a rock and hit the guy on the head. He put the phone cord around this woman's neck and strangled her. And what we're seeing, because it doesn't make sense otherwise to me.
Well, and so, again, I think this is what the genius of this film is. I fully believe, because I don't know, where do we go? I love this movie so much that after I saw it, I told my wife about it, and later that night, since it's only an hour and 10 minutes, we rewatched it. And it was so great having just watched it, but watched it in parts.
Yeah.
To rewatch it from beginning to end and pick up on little things that I missed and, wrestle with this idea of the unreliable narrator.
Yes.
Right? We see events, and there's a linear way when we talk, again, subjectivity and objectivity. If we just go on what the movie gives us,
right,
I guess we could say this man is a victim of circumstance.
Exactly.
He's just the innocent dupe.
Yes.
And I actually believe, I didn't read there's a book that it's based on.
Okay, I
think that the movie is so low budget that they just were able to shoot what they could, and that there's every possibility that their intentions was this guy was a victim of circumstance,
right,
which would follow perfectly within the rules of film noir.
Yes, that's basically the definition of film noir, is a sad sack who's down on his luck and things get worse.
So, by that very essence, the innocent guy who runs into some very unfortunate things, however, intentional or not intentional, the execution of it leads us to instead look at him as a guy who, we become those same cops that he's afraid of. We're like, of course you're guilty. This is ridiculous. And so it becomes a very interesting film now. And you know what? My wife, it allows you to then theorize all sorts of crazy things.
Right. Yeah, let's hear some of your theories.
Well, there's no evidence of any of this, right, in the movie other than what it gives us. But my wife had a great thought. The guy who originally owned the car, he was a bit of there's a little clue in there that the narrator guy says, well, I don't really like this guy. It turns out that he was a little bit of he was a fake Bible salesman or something. And he pretended to be a lot of things. And he, talked about these scratches on his arm.
Right.
And that there was this awful, awful woman who we later meet. And she is truly awful, at least according to the narrator. We don't know whether she really was. But what we also understand is that he was probably trying to attack or rape her.
Yeah.
And that's why she scratched him and got out. Right. So we don't really know what this woman really is.
Right.
However, this whole idea that there's some information discovered in the glove compartment that the narrator does know that he was going to go out to visit this, long lost father.
Right.
And then this woman discovers it. Here's the question. What if, and this is what my wife's great theory was, what if the guy driving the car, he also wasn't who he said he was, and that he had previously knocked off the real guy, and he had been going across country to pose as the son because he wanted to steal the dad's millions or whatever, and that he ends up in a circumstance where he gets bumped off by this new guy, and it's like a loop. And I'm like, well, you know what? There's no evidence to support that, but there's also no evidence not to support it. And it's a weird thing where if you recall, right, and this is, I think, lends to your theory about this narrator not being very reliable.
Yeah.
The guy who picks him up, he's got some kind of weird condition. He's taking these pills, and then he's asleep. And, of course, it seems at first like he's dead anyway because he's not waking up. And the idea is his sort of justification that, well, maybe this guy, maybe he had a heart attack and died. And that's why when he fell out, he hit his head. And also this girl, the woman, this really Vera, I think her name, she talks about how she doesn't seem to have a lot of time left. And she has like a cough at one point.
Yes, that's right.
And so the question is, was she dying and she decides that she's going to frame him for murder by choking herself with the cord? Again, it's not explained, but maybe in this narrator's mind, he needed to have some justification, as if like, well, she was dying anyway, and that I didn't mean to kill her.
Right.
And somehow the idea that both of these people weren't well kind of fits into him not feeling as guilty.
Yeah, so it's all these different ways of absolving his guilt. Now,
but see, this is all we're getting, all of these juicy things from an hour and 7 minute super low budget movie. It's just amazing.
You saw it twice, so you can probably confirm this for me, whether I misheard this or not. But what's the name of the guy driving the car? The guy who dies? I can't remember the character name. But anyhow, at the end, I think I remember, and I could just be wrong about this, but something about how the police were looking for him and his wife.
Yeah, well, no, because so this is where it all gets contorted. If you recall, and again, it helps to see the film a second time.
Yeah.
When the guy falls out of the car and he hits his head and dead, the great thing is that the narrator is basically saying, I know I should have waited for the cops, but they wouldn't believe me.
Right.
And well, I didn't have any money, so I had to take his wallet. And well, if I
Yeah,
got caught with if I got caught with this nice car, the cops wouldn't believe that was him. So I better take his identity. And he left his identity.
Right.
So basically, the guy in Arizona is dead as him, in a sense.
Yes.
And so later, like they find, and they basically, the confusion is that, they posed as a married couple.
Right.
And so when she's dead, they actually think that husband guy had killed her. Then they find the dead body. It's like a whole weird thing.
Yeah,
and
okay, that makes sense. It's totally convoluted.
So here's the thing. Because it looks like he's getting away with murder, or that people might assume he's getting away with murder, the whole thing about him imagining cops eventually picking him up and figuring it out, and that him getting arrested in his mind, that was all done because of the Hays Code.
Oh.
And for those who don't know, and this is
you researched this?
You fucking I researched it.
No, I know the Hays Code,
obsessed.
but I mean about this film.
Well,
I didn't know this about
I was obsessed with this movie. You don't understand. Like I know you may not think that like, well, geez, I don't know. Did Jim really like pay attention to what I was saying? I got so interested in what was going to happen in Detour after our taping.
Yeah.
That I immediately said, I got to watch this. And you were so right that this movie was so amazing when she comes on the screen that I just, I had to find out more information.
Yeah.
And because I wanted to see what other people were saying about it too.
Yeah.
And so the key is that the Hays Code, which was this moral code that was put into place in movies for years, had to obey it until basically, just like today's Republican Party, they said, we don't need the rules, we'll just make up our own. And so the same thing is that eventually studios and filmmakers said, you know what, this is just I don't need to follow it. But for years they did. And one of the things was, if you were shown committing a crime on film,
there had to be
the criminals couldn't get away with it. You could
Right.
not show criminals getting away with bad behavior. Now, that is essential because it is the key to unlocking the plots of every film noir movie,
right,
from the 40s up until the end of the 50s. And that's why I think in the 60s and the 70s, noir changes, because you didn't have to follow that.
Well, the other thing that happened in the 60s was that the government broke up the vertical integration of the studios, so the studios couldn't own theaters anymore.
Well, yes, I understand that, but I'm just saying that when things changed, when you didn't have to follow those rules,
right,
you can then explore those plots differently. But so basically, I didn't really know that at the time. I kind of forgotten, I should say.
It's like every Jimmy Cagney movie that he plays a gangster or a villain in.
Yeah, he dies.
He dies. Yes, he dies at the end. And yeah, that's just the way it has to work.
And so what's great is that in this noir thing, again, he's either this tragic figure,
right,
who was just circumstances and that accidents happen, or he, is guilty, and at the end he's imagining that they will eventually catch up with him on that. So it covers all the bases.
So do you think that last shot is his imagination?
Yes. And it's actually everything I've read is that was him talking about eventually getting picked up.
Okay, because
I think if you watch it a second time, it makes it more clear.
Yeah, I thought that too when I watched it, just because the way the voiceover is phrased.
Okay, so now a couple of things. And again, I know we're precious short on time, but it's, and I'm not going to maybe we'll get back into it after you've seen some. But of course, right, Criterion didn't just offer me up Detour. It offered up this whole little segment of Columbia Film Noirs. So
Yes.
Columbia, the studio, they had created a whole bunch of film noirs. And the reason why they packaged these up and offered them is that Columbia, the studio, they were a little bit more rough and tumble. They weren't as big as some of the other studios. They just had a very specific angle on film noirs.
Right.
And I guess over the years, a lot of them have become very famous. I admit that I don't know, it's not a genre that I ever really paid much attention to, except for like movies like Double Indemnity,
Right.
Things like that. So because of Detour, which wasn't Columbia, but like that was sort of that movie that said, I'm going to go explore further.
And check out some noir.
I've watched a whole bunch of them. And once you know that whatever misdeeds happen,
Yes.
that someone's going to pay the price at the end, you can kind of figure out where these are all headed, but then it becomes fun to just watch and see what do these various screenwriters and directors do with the genre.
Yeah, within that format. And because it's a really specific genre that has a whole narrative structure built into it. Now, have you seen Shoot the Piano Player?
That's another one I'm gonna watch, because that's like, French doing film noir. And the thing is, as you had mentioned, David Goodis,
Yes,
was the original author of the book that it's based on, and his name pops up as several of these Columbia noir films are based on David Goodis novels.
Yeah.
I just finished watching one called The Burglar.
Oh yes, I do want to see that. Yeah, that's high on my list.
Jane Mansfield's in it. She was a horrible actress. She's terrible. She's terrible in this movie. But she became big from the time that this film had been shot, before it was even released, a couple years later. And they quickly ushered it out to capitalize on the fact that she was, and she's really, really bad in it. But these films all feature, like, it's kind of like a thing with these. They all have a set piece.
Yes.
And that's like a staple of the noir. That's like a cool set piece. And they have a sequence in this film that some of the sequences are a little grainy. They must have been shot on fast stock, because they do a lot of outdoor, like real life photography in not sets, which was something that big studio films just didn't do. They just did on the shoestring movies.
Right.
But this sequence was shot on very low ASA black and white stock, beautifully shot by Burnett Guffey, and it takes place inside a funhouse.
Oh.
And just the compositions and the angles. Oh my God.
This is The Burglar?
This is The Burglar.
Okay.
It's a fantastic sequence. There's another film by Don Siegel called The Lineup, and it has some amazing sequences in various like San Francisco landmarks that I had to look up, and they're all gone. It's this one that takes place in this thing called Sutros, which used to be a bathhouse. Then it eventually was too expensive to run, so they turned it into a museum and also an ice skating rink. And it eventually burned down a few years after the film was shot. It is awesome. So like these movies have all of these awesome sequences, and these like, it's almost like just like a set piece.
Right.
There are at least 5 scenes where the screenwriters write this awesome back and forth repartee that nobody in real life would ever talk like this. Right. It is just so awesome.
Okay, so we're going to need to do a noir episode coming up soon.
I'm going to watch by the time I'm going to watch every one that they've got up there, because I'm really having a good time.
Yeah, well, it's a really fun genre. So I got really into noir when I was in high school working at the video store.
And that makes sense.
Yeah,
because that's where you have access to a bunch of these.
And I was a huge Cagney fan at the time. Those aren't. Well, I guess some of those are noir, but not really. Not the way I'm thinking of noir.
It's sort of what you're like. Maybe even in film school, you're sort of spoon fed this handful of titles.
Yes,
and that's why going into this Columbia series, there were a couple of titles that I'd heard before, but most of them I'd never heard of. And, again, they're just awesome. I mean, one of these films, Nightfall, features like a very young Anne Bancroft. She was like maybe 23 at the time.
Okay.
And so it's fascinating to see actors that you've seen them in their famous roles, but now you're seeing them in these like completely different roles. And again, it's just, this is why I love that the Criterion Channel's back, because, I've seen a bunch of the movies that they have streaming because I had the service before.
Yeah.
So now I'm kind of delving into other things that, I almost force myself to say, well, this isn't like my first go-to, but I'm going to go to it and watch it because I'm going to probably get something new out of it. And that's where I'm getting with these noir films.
Exactly.
The filmmaking techniques on display are really great. And also, as I keep stressing, and I think this is the reason why I went there, is that when I watched those Craig Zoller movies that are all over 2 hours,
Yeah.
these are films that are telling tight, really well-constructed stories, even though the plots are a little bit unbelievable.
Right.
All within an hour and 10 to an hour and 30 minutes.
Yeah, and there's something amazing about boiling a movie down like that. Because Dragged Across Concrete is actually a noir film, but it's 2 hours and 45 minutes long. It could be
and
three
I'm just
noir
wondering,
films.
again, maybe Craig, if you're out there, you got to listen to us, get Criterion, watch some of these films, and get some tips
And make a
improve.
90-minute movie.
Yeah. I just think it's a great exercise. I think that's the thing is these were B movies, and part of being a B movie is they were intended to run as a second feature. So people used to see 2 movies when they would go to the theater, and the second feature, if you package that up with trailers and other shorts, it wasn't supposed to be a long movie.
Right,
It was
exactly.
supposed to be about an hour and 20 minutes. And so that was by design. And they were such shoestring budgets that, you didn't want to make a longer film. It would cost more.
Exactly, yeah. Detour was shot in 6 days.
That is a masterpiece of the genre. And again, it features this. There's nobody that can't come away from this movie and not say, wow, on that Anne Savage. And it made me a little sad. And I'll tell you is that she's now no longer with us. And I didn't know about this movie. And I just wish it was something that I learned about like when I was 18 so that I could have been like ringing the bells of like how great Anne Savage is.
Yeah, well, the movie wasn't really that available.
No, and then when our final point, and again, we never know where these things are going to take us. I think there were some other things that we could talk about in relation to Detour and the unreliable narrator. That's just going to have to wait for another day. But a very important note, because people are going to go and say, oh, I really want to see this movie Detour now. And I have to have a warning that you warned me of, and then I went and I checked. It is also playing on Amazon Prime.
Yes.
And Amazon Prime is not the same as Criterion Channel. They have this library of films. I don't know where they're getting them from, but there's some that are they're okay prints, and then there are some that are so unbelievably awful. If you want to understand how amazing a restoration job that Criterion's copy is, you've got to take 2 seconds and watch like a minute of Detour on Amazon Prime. It's practically unwatchable.
It is practically unwatchable. It's such a bad print, such a bad transfer. It's just...
And I think that's why people must have seen it for years.
Oh, yes, that is how people saw it for years. Yeah.
It's a shock. It's so bad. And I'm actually thinking that what I might do is to try to take a still from it and then take a still from the Criterion one and post it on Instagram to show people the difference as a warning.
Yeah, because it's really the difference is shocking, and this is what Criterion is doing. And I should add also that there were a lot of like the George Lucas Foundation threw in some cash for this restoration.
Did you watch the? There's like a whole like little making of.
I didn't watch that. Yeah,
you should watch that. You got to get as obsessed with Detour as I did and watch all of the supplements that Criterion offers because it's really cool. And, another thing, I don't know whether it's Netflix or if it's Amazon Prime, but again, when not all prints, especially if it's public domain.
If it's public domain, you're going to see a bad print.
Yeah, so there's a film, and the print isn't that bad because, ironically, just because I was like sort of into these noir films, I had started watching on either Amazon Prime or Netflix, The Third Man again.
Right.
Carol Reed's film. And it's sort of a noir, European noir of a different type. But it's like a detective story, basically.
Yeah, but I think it fits in the noir.
The print's not bad.
Yeah.
However, Criterion, because it's May and they've got some new titles they've just loaded up, and they'll be loading up some new stuff all month. They put on, there's 3 Carol Reed movies they've loaded, and one of them is The Third Man. So I was like, well, geez, I should switch over and see what I'm missing. First of all, I guess they have the European opening of the movie, which is a little different from the American version.
Okay.
And the print is better.
Of course.
So watch it on Criterion, and that's what I've switched to, and it's like amazing. It's the best I've ever seen The Third Man look.
Okay, I'm definitely going to check it. I see, yeah, they've added it.
Yeah. So, anyways, there's lots going on, lots to watch.
And yeah, just be wary of those bad prints on Amazon.
Yeah. Shame on you, Amazon.
Well, a movie like Detour, yeah, if you watch it on Amazon, you're just gonna think it's awful.
Anyways, look, I thank everybody for tuning in to stuff we've seen, and if you like what you've been listening to, you got to tell a friend. We really do need some more listeners. I mean, it just if they like movies, then get them over here and make them listen to an episode. Maybe not some of the early ones where the sound was bad.
Yeah, don't listen to the early ones, but.
Well, they're still good too, but the sound isn't as good as it is now. But it's a free subscription, people. And when we say subscribe to iTunes, the Apple Podcast, Podbean, Spotify, Google Play, or TuneIn, it's just a mechanism. When you subscribe, it just means that whenever the episode is available, you'll get it into your little app. But then so catch us in all our episodes over at our website, stuffwe'veseen.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at Stuff We've Seen Podcast, or on Twitter at @stuff_VE. And then if you got any feedback, comments, suggestions, complaints, drop us a line at feedback@gemandteal.com. All right, any other final words, my friend?
No, just thanks for listening, and we'll see you here. You'll hear us next time.
You see, you almost said see us.
I did.
You almost fell into that trap. All right, well, stay safe and go see some stuff.